being invited to do a negotiation that I'm showing you is a picture that was taken about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And I had the privilege of being invited to do a negotiation seminar in, of all places, Ashgabat. And if you wonder where that is, it's Turkmenistan. And if you wonder where that is, it's between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. And a lot of my friends wondered where that was as well. So, you know, we're in the Turkic countries, and the people that were part of this seminar were members of parliament, members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, diplomats, and students of the Diplomatic College. So what you see here is just a selection of my students. I had about 45 people, and I was doing it with 2 other trainers who did an excellent job, and it was 5 days long. And it was extremely interesting cross-cultural experience. The language was Russian. Now, I speak a little bit of Russian, but it was done through interpreters. So we had translated all of our materials, our slides and stuff, into Russian. So it was a very, very interesting experience, and involving and making people part of this kind of a training situation. You'll notice there's a little label with the logo on it there, Situation Management Systems. And I'll use that as part of my introduction. I have for over 30 years now been a certified and certifying trainer for situation management systems who have a program called Negotiation Strategies and Tactics and another called Positive Negotiation. These are programs roughly based on the Harvard model, and I need to give them full credit for this because the framework that I'm going to use for this, since this is the basic negotiation program that I build on to do cross-cultural negotiation, I need to give them full credit for the organization of this. So my work with them has been largely doing training in various places, and both in Asia and in Europe, as well as years ago in the USA when I was living there. For the past 6 years, ending about 1.5 years ago, I was doing negotiation training for the Asian Development Bank, which was a real thrill because I generally have 12 to 15 participants in the group. And of the 12 to 15 participants, probably 2 might have been from the same country. And they were dealing with Asian countries, Asia Pacific and Pacific Island countries. It's a development bank, and therefore negotiating both with governments and contractors for development projects. So I've had a very, very interesting, I guess I can call it, career in the negotiation process, and I'm delighted with it. It's one of my favorite things to do. So listen, I'll make you all a deal. If you listen carefully and ask good questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Bargain?
Yes,
Lift
Dad.
your hands and say yes. Thank you. Okay, let's go forward. The first part of this may seem a little bit strange to you, but what I want to do is focus on what we really mean by negotiation. And it's a very human characteristic. As Adam Smith said, man is an animal that makes bargains. No other animal does this. No dog ever exchanges bones with another dog. However, lately I've seen monkeys exchanging things with researchers as part of the process. So maybe we're not so alone in the negotiation process. What's for lunch is obviously a cultural question. You see a hamburger and a hot dog if you're American. You see a widgety grub, which are absolutely delicious, which I've eaten in Australia, and a nice Filipino assortment down in the lower left-hand corner with pata and a variety of other tasty things. And the bread up top is from Turkmenistan. So what's for lunch is a cultural question, but for some reason or other, we don't always realize that the question is, how do we negotiate, is a very cultural question as well. And it shows up in quite different ways. On the top of the picture, you see two people obviously bargaining. And I'll get to explaining this a little later, but the difference between bargaining and negotiation in the way I talk about it is that bargaining is generally one currency. How much do you want? How much will I give of one currency? Whereas, as we know, negotiations involve a whole mess of needs and currencies. The lower picture you see is obviously a political negotiation for the Middle East, for the Israel and Palestinian situation. So what I'm going to do first, this is the strange bit, is I'm going to look at with you a number of conflict resolution strategies. And normally, if I were doing a training program and I had you all in the same room, we'd be brainstorming around this, but I'll just throw out a few ideas and allow you to perhaps jot down your own and think about how you would manage these things. Negotiation is a form of conflict resolution. So I'm going to show you a number of strategies and think about, when do you find these strategies useful or appropriate, especially in your culture, and when do you find that these strategies are not useful or not appropriate in your culture or our culture, okay? So strategy number one, not usually a preferred strategy, but we see enough of it in the world, is slug it out, make war. And if you think about it, what's the advantage of this? Well, usually the stronger is the winner, not always. And the problem with the disadvantage is that it's a winner-take-all situation, if indeed there is one, often from conflict situations where you try to slug it out, both sides lose, not just wars, but individual conflicts. And if somebody is made a bad loser, you know that somewhere the cultural conversation will grow. We'll be back. We'll get you again later on. So think about it. You know, where are the situations where you think actually slugging it out works, if there are some that you think of, and where it does not work. Then we go to the next strategy, which is if you have an argument with somebody and you both work for the same boss or both in the same jurisdiction of somebody, go to the top, ask the boss. What are the advantages of asking the boss? Well, the boss makes the decision, and the boss may be wise and make a good decision. And on the other hand, the boss may favor someone. The boss may have his or her own ideas about how this should be managed. And consequently, there are disadvantages to going up the hierarchical chain. Now, already, I'm sure you're thinking of the fact that in some cultures, it's a lot more common to go to the boss to resolve a conflict than it is to either battle it out or use some other strategy person to person. So think about in your culture and the cultures you work with, go to the top, ask the boss, is that, what are the pluses and what are the minuses? Conflict resolution strategy number 3, listen, explain, clarify. Now this has the advantage of generally creating a relatively good bond between the people, but it may keep someone from refraining from the confrontation that is really at the heart of the conflict. And sometimes, as Paulo Coelho notes, don't waste your time with explanations. People only hear what they want to hear. So these are the ups and downs. Now, those of you who have tender sensitivities, I want you to be very careful because we're going to talk about cutting a cake in the next slide. But as they warn you on the newspapers, these images may be somewhat disconcerting. I think this is probably one that's that way. This really is a cake, folks. And compromise is resolution strategy number 4. Okay, let's split the difference. Or yes, the answer to split the difference can also be, okay, let's split the difference. You take 20% and I'll take 80%. So what are the ups and downs of a compromise, and what are the cultural feelings about compromise? For example, one of the disadvantages of compromise is if it's a fundamental or key issue for you, as Gandhi says there, compromise is based on give and take, but there can be no give and take on fundamentals, okay? And that makes it a surrender. On the other hand, I worked in the Netherlands for quite a while, and as those of you who've done that or are from there are aware of the fact that consensus is an extremely high value in Dutch culture, largely based on the kind of collaboration and cooperation that was needed to carry out the creation of the Netherlands. As you know, the old quotation is, God made the Dutch, but the Dutch built the Netherlands, or the Dutch made the Netherlands. So the building of the polders and all of the irrigation systems and collaboration that was necessary has left a strong impact of how important it is to create consensus. And there's always the sense I found that consensus should always hurt everybody a little bit. So maybe that's a value in the context where you are at. So that's number 4. And of course, you can avoid the situation. You can walk away. You can end it. There's an old song called I Like Bananas and You Like Bananas. I say Havana and I get Havana. Bananas, bananas, Havana, Havana. You go your way, I'll go mine. So what is the advantage and disadvantage of solving a conflict by avoiding it? Well, the advantage is you avoid the conflict, the roughness, perhaps the battling it out. On the other hand, it doesn't get resolved. Maybe the hope is that it will go away in some cases, but the fact is, there you go. Avoiding will probably come back and bite you at some point. Maybe not, but you have to size that up before you decide to use this strategy. Next, conflict resolution strategy number 6, employ a third party. Who's going to be the bridge between the two conflicting parties? And there's a couple of ways that we normally do this. One of these is that we employ a third party who's called a mediator. So it's someone who basically facilitates the negotiation or the conflict resolution between two people. And that person is there to advise, to coach, to listen, not to resolve. On the other hand, sometimes we employ a third party to resolve the conflict, and that's supposed to be somebody who is really neutral, blind to the knowledgeable, but blind to the favoritism of either party. So that becomes an arbitrator, and often arbitration is part of law in some cultures and required as part of practice in other cultures for certain situations, everything from personal divorce on to labor relations and so on. So employing a third party, what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? Well, the facilitator may be very helpful. On the other hand, the arbitrator may make a decision that it doesn't get your needs met. So there are, again, pluses and minuses. And very interestingly, in our course in Turkmenistan, there was an enormous interest in mediation, especially community mediation, how to solve problems at the street level without people needing to go to authority, where they felt that the arbitration decision would generally not listen well enough to what their situation was. So we may go back and do some work with them on mediation as a strategy that's useful. Next strategy is accommodating. Okay, have it your way. Give in, surrender. And this obviously works if the issue is not too big and the relationship is important, culturally speaking. And on the other hand, It may indeed, if the issue is important, once again, as in the compromise, you may not get your needs met and you will have to come back to this again and so on. A lot of people also like to think of conflict resolution as problem solving. But actually, problem solving is a very useful technique if the problem is susceptible to a rational interpretation and analysis. But a lot of times there are a lot more things involved than just the data, the proof, the logic of the situation. So there you have it. One more to look at here. Conflict resolution strategy number 9, tolerate the difference. Okay, let's just live with the difference and do what our own thing is. Let's continue to communicate about it, but at a certain point we let go of it. Now, I've given you 9 of these conflict resolution strategies, and in a moment I'm going to do some focusing and placing of negotiation as a strategy, as the 10th strategy here. But at this moment, I'd like to pause and perhaps we could have some comments from you about, as you look at these strategies for conflict resolution, what pluses and minuses maybe came up for you? And I'll let Matt facilitate that.
Thank you, George. So if we type that, so there are some strategies, type away within your own experience, your own cultural context. Is one of those favored within your culture, or is there a downside and a risk? Tap on your keyboards now. I'll just go through a couple. So conflict, referring to the boss, listening, compromise, avoiding, this third party idea, the mediator or the arbitrator, accommodation, tolerating. Actually, George, what I missed it. What was number 8? Remind me.
Let me go back here. I don't. Problem solving.
Problem solving. Okay. So let's just see who's fast on the keyboard. Has anyone got a cultural context which they're bringing to the program where one of those would be great, or they can see one of those would be full of pitfalls, traps, unacceptable from a cultural perspective? Type away, and then we'll see what we've got. Here we go, here we go. So tolerate the difference, Monica is saying, that's good. Compromise is coming from a Dutch person, first time that's ever happened. And accommodating, so Monica's adding to her previous answer. The business world uses problem solving in the US. So we're seeing problem solving as a critical one for the US. I'll just go through these, George, then you can comment, pick out what you like. I think all of them are actually used in my culture, which is a Nordic answer. So they're the most Catholic, okay? Surrender is not acceptable to me. Interesting. It'd be interesting to discuss whether that's accommodate, losing short term in the context of trust, maybe. Germany, compromise, historically the first attempt. It works rather better in politics and business. Very good. Kinga, on the top, Poland. Go to the top. Oh, okay, so ask the boss. Poland. Maybe you'd have a comment on that in a minute. Strategy number 8 in my department, says Eric. Many departments don't consider the situation as a problem. Very good. Okay, here we go. Some are totally unacceptable in some cultures. Here we go. Going straight to the boss could be a disaster in some cultures. Very good. Different scales of conflict require different approaches. Oh, someone's been a trainer. If the conflict is big, avoidance is not the solution. Cause is not part of a negotiation. Only one side would be okay. Okay, listen, explain, clarify. And that's from a Polish person with international experience. Professor Vincent says, I see there is also negotiation styles, not strategies. Discuss that. Okay, yes, very good. Ask the boss, use the hierarchy, says Bielek, Miss Bielek, I think that's Polish. Strategy number 2, hierarchy, someone says, rotten compromise, says a cynical poll. Avoiding and accommodating in Hungary. Very interesting, Esther. Thank you. Accommodating can be in business, but often seen as a weakness. Very nice. Accommodating perceived as a weakness. In Spain, referring to the boss used to work, accommodation too. I think that's from a fairly cynical person. Conflict resolution can be useful. We're going for it here. I'll just do a couple more, three more. Go to the boss in Russia. Okay, so that's I think we would all relate to that one. Go to the elderly from Mateus. That's nice. So we're using the boss or someone high using the age continuum. Very nice. And the last one, explain, listen, and clarify to find out the interests. And this is from somebody, I can't guess the geography, maybe Middle East. George, how do you react to all of that?
Well, that's a nice, rich combination, and I'm sure that each of the people who provided answers could say more about it and expand on them. What I'd like to say is that probably most of these things happen in most cultures, and what we got were people's preferences or dislikes for certain kinds of strategies. In fact, given the situation, any of these may be appropriate if the culture accepts it. And I like the fact that we have these various things because bits and pieces of these may find their way into negotiation. And I'm gonna move on in a moment here to looking at then how do we define negotiation as a conflict resolution strategy. So thanks for all those inputs. It helps me to know you're thinking it through as we go along and sort of assessing it against both your own cultural norms and the experiences that you've had working interculturally. So let me go forward and raise the question of what is the definition? What's your definition, your metaphor for negotiation? I'm going to give you first the negotiation working definition that I use as a part of my courses when doing negotiation strategies and tactics, whether it's intercultural or whether it's within a single culture. And here's the working definition. So number one, a process in which two or more parties and with common and conflicting vested interests. What do we mean by that? Well, we mean that we have something in common, some reason to do business together, and some conflicting interests. And the word vested, that's a little, what do I want to say? It's a little difficult word in a sense, but what it means is you have something to win or lose as a party in this process. So for example, the simplest thing is we've got a bicycle for sale. I need a bicycle to go to work. We have a common interest, which is called the bicycle. Then we have a conflicting vested interest, which is how much do you need the bicycle? How much do I want to pay for the bicycle? And how do we come to a resolution so that you get your needs met and I get mine met? So we come together with the intention of putting forth and discussing explicit proposals to reach an agreement. And as I mentioned, the proposals may be in one currency, and that's a bargaining negotiation where it's only a matter of, do you want 50 euros for the bicycle, or can I get away with 20 pounds, or what do you need, okay? And on the other hand, I did this as a sample negotiation with a class not too long ago, and the woman wound up renting me the bicycle on weekdays, but she wanted it on weekend when I was working to fulfill my need to get back and forth to work, but she wanted it back on weekends so she could get refreshing exercise for her holiday, okay, the weekend holiday. So I think it's interesting. I find this negotiation definition works in almost all cultural analyses. So we look at common and conflicting vested interests, and we come together in a process where we're going to make proposals to each other so that we can come to an agreement. Now, culture rears its lovely head in this picture. And remember in the question back here, I asked, what's your metaphor for negotiation? Is it a poker game? I find that in the US, most business is thought of as a game, and negotiation is often thought of as a game. It's about, okay, you might win tonight, and next Saturday night you might lose, and you'll come back again. Nothing personal in it, but let's do the best we can as we play this game. That's one metaphor. And as I give you a couple of these metaphors, I want you to think of in your culture, and we'll ask you again to type some stuff in your culture, what do you think is the main metaphor? Or maybe there's a couple, but how do people see, visualize, make a metaphor for culture? So I move on to the next one here, which was the traditional Japanese view of negotiation. Negotiation is like farming. You very carefully plow and prepare the ground. You plant the seeds. You make sure that you water them well. You take care of the sprouts, and little by little, you get a nice harvest from this negotiation. And hopefully, if you've done this all right, you will have harvest after harvest from the relationship that's created in this negotiation. So that's one traditional view of Japanese negotiation. And one that I like as well here is that in Ireland, we say, life is not a race, it's a dance. And we also say that about negotiation. It's a dance. It's a dance until we come to a successful conclusion, and we can both applaud the effects of the dance. So I've put out 3 existing metaphors that I've experienced about how to picture negotiation, how to think about negotiation, the discourse, the narrative that we have inside of us. And again, I'm going to pause for a moment and ask folks to, if you would, if you have a different metaphor, or if you concur with one of these metaphors, or see one of these metaphors, any comment you have about them would be welcome for a couple minutes here.
Thank you, George. So we've had the poker game, the Asian farmer, the dancers. I like the dancers, the shared energy. Do you either go with one of those and relate to that, or have you got a different image or metaphor or model that you like or exists in your family, in your culture, in your work? So do you want to tap away? There isn't time to draw a drawing, so if you just tap away, let's see what we get. Here we go. My metaphor as an Italian, says Christina, is a battle, but not a war. Negotiation is hard work. That comes from Hungary. Look for balance between conflict and cooperation, said someone from the Low Countries. A soccer game in Germany with the focus on goals. Nice one. Just a remark, I like the dance metaphor, but it takes two to tango, and that is not what is visible in the Irish dance. I like the farming analogy, says someone from a very green island, which is about relationship building. In Armenian, the verb negotiate is literally translated as the join the thoughts, the reasoning of parties together. Concur that negotiations are like a dance in Ireland. Good. Negotiation is about how far we can go into someone else's limits in a situation every day. It's about convincing people to do or give what we expect them to. It's the handshake after a deal. Very Quaker. It's long-term, I think, developing the farming metaphor. Germany, more a chess than a poker game. It's more complex. Nice one, York. Germany, don't beat around the bush. Very straightforward. Building a house. That's from the Low Countries. Balance between relationship and task. Negotiation is like a fencing match in France. Nice one. The most eloquent and fastest repartee wins. Fantastic. In France, negotiation is a fight. Slightly different. As with the Irish, start with the ideal and end with a deal. Negotiate in Germany is a battle. We've had that before. Good. Tasks. We are going for it. A rugby scrum. Being Dutch is definitely something that should benefit all involved. Let's stick to the dance, but have a group dance. Very good. Workers and employers, or versus employers. Russia, it's a battle. Bad news, but there we are. Harmony, give and take, honesty in Norway. Building a house sounds good to me too. I like that one. My experience of negotiation is a tug of war. So that's, two teams with a rope in between. It demands a lot of effort and energy, and someone falls at the end. Okay, let's have to say three more. To climb a high mountain, it requires resistance, resilience even, and preparation. Negotiate for a long-term partnership. There we go. One more T. Is sex the ultimate metaphor? I'm not going to say who said that. George, do you have a reaction to those comments?
It's just wonderfully rich. The next time I do this, I will have 30 more slides with people speakers. What I'm noticing, however, is that there is a kind of, there's a division here. I won't say it's perfectly dyadic, but what I'm hearing is, on one hand, there's a view of a negotiation as conflict with winners and losers. And on the other, there's a kind of, no one said win-win negotiation, but the idea of constructing something together, of dancing together, and so on. And so I think this is a worthwhile polarity to keep in mind. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about why I think win-win negotiations are a lot more possible and stable than defeating the other person or taking advantage of the other person. I'm not denying that it happens, and I'm not denying that people will have this intention. But in my training in negotiation, I try to focus on getting the greatest level of understanding to make things work. And I'll show you why in a moment. But I'm going to back off for a second to say something about when I teach this. Some of you are familiar with the cultural detective self-discovery, and it's about looking at what are your core cultural values, and then we look at how these affect your behavior and how other people react to them. And so what I do when I'm doing a very cross-cultural negotiation like the ones I was doing in the Philippines, I would have people not just say, what are your core values as a culture, but what are the core values, the core learnings, the core discourse, the narratives about negotiation that you share with your cultural origins, or your, which may be several these days, and which are personally important to you. So once again, as in most intercultural work, we look at how do I myself hold it? What are my values? And of course, a lot of those have just appeared in the images that you gave. Then how might each of my values affect how I negotiate? What are the kinds of things that I do? What are the strategies and tactics that I choose because of my values? Then how might my cultural values and strengths be seen negatively by the other party, so that I need to be cautious about them and do the same kind of research into the other person's core values. I've been an author in the Cultural Detective series for quite a while. I've been involved in about 8 of these and have a couple more that I'm collaborating with underway. And the nice thing about the Cultural Detective now is that it's an online tool that you can subscribe to for what's next to nothing in terms of the value there. I don't mean to be selling stuff here, but I need to say why I favor the tools I favor for this process. So however you want to do it, identifying your own values around negotiation and using whatever tools you have at your disposal to understand how the other party sees negotiation in your preparation is very important part of the process. So that's what I do. I have people explore their own values, then I have them explore how the core values of other cultures, those that they're negotiating with, affect potentially how the negotiation will go forward. So what I'm going to do now is get to the heart of the matter, in a sense, which is what are the issues around the stages of negotiation? And here I'm using the stages that are part of this program that I've been teaching for a long time. First thing that we do, obviously, is plan, okay? Now here's a little planning meeting, perhaps not one of the ones that you want to be on the receiving end of it, but doing a good job of planning, getting adequate information. And then cultural question that emerges immediately is how much information, how much personal information. I had the experience of someone telling me that, well, I basically learned the roles of the people in the other organizations and what they produced and so on. And when I got to the place where I was negotiating, they knew where I lived. They knew the name of my dog. Okay, so interest in the personal dimension and the personal values and affectations and so on was very much a part of the other party's incredibly thorough preparation for the planning. So the negotiation process starts with how do you plan? How does the other party plan? And what do you do to make sure that you are what you do is advantageous, at least to you, but hopefully if we're talking about win-win negotiation, is successful all the way around. Next stage is what we call the startup. And we're not negotiating yet, but we're doing what's needed to establish a positive climate. And here again, I mean, these things are familiar to you. What I'm going to be pointing out is the cultural insertion points, the places at which you need to look for how does culture affect this. And, you know, we know that there are some people who go into a business situation and say, hey, did you see the football game last night? Yeah, that was great. Okay, let's get down to business, bingo. Okay. Generally speaking, you are more effective with establishing a positive climate. And that may involve a couple things. It may involve an appreciation of the place you're at, the culture you're working for. I remember one of the first times I went to Spain to do some negotiation with a company for some training. They had an escort pick me up at the airport, take me to my hotel, and take me through the entire countryside and familiarize me with that, and then plan a couple of dinners to get started on the discussion and get to know each other and move on. So you need to look at what are the things that make a positive climate for you? What does the other person's culture expect as a positive climate? One of the things that's important to look at here is if you are coming to a situation where other negotiations have taken place, has your predecessor soured the situation? Or has something happened that means that you have to do repair work before you get down to the negotiation process? And that repair work may be anything from cultural faux pas to something that happened that was seen as unfair or inadequate and so on. Now, I'm not going to go into the kiss, bow, and shake hands of all this. As interculturalists and as people doing negotiations across culture, you best know what the local customs are. Okay, that you just a good example. I was a man from India who regularly negotiated in various places in Asia, who was in my course, and he told the story of he was going to negotiate a contract with the government of Cambodia, and he was led to the highest minister, and there were a lot of people around, and and the press was there, television, and so on. And as he's sitting talking, he crosses his legs, and all of a sudden the minister sends all the people out of the room, gives him a lecture on the impoliteness of crossing his legs in the presence of somebody in authority like this, and then gets acquiescence and calls the rest of the people back into the room. Perhaps, for that person, not such a serious issue in terms of his own feelings, but certainly in terms of the culture of what would be understood by this image going forward and how this would affect the negotiation. So make sure you have your kiss, bow, and shake hands down. Another dimension of the startup is getting agreement on the agenda and the ground rules, and that includes identifying who the participants are. In your culture, do you have a full mandate and portfolio when you go out to negotiate? You may discover that the other party, culturally speaking, the people that you're negotiating with are not the decision makers. They report to somebody who makes the decision. Or on the other hand, they may need to make a group decision, and you need to know who are the people that are influential and influenced in this process. Getting as clear as you can on the ground rules, how and when you will negotiate, what the context is. I don't know if any of you remember I'm not as old as I am, but the negotiations that took place at the Lutizia Hotel for the closing of to bring an end to the Vietnam War, and they argued for days over the shape of the table. And what did the shape of the table have to do with it? It wasn't about furniture preferences. It was about who sat where and the significance of that, which unfortunately at the outset was totally lost on the American negotiating team. And little by little, they learned about this and discovered where it was going. So getting agenda, ground rules, context, all of these things will have cultural dimensions to them. The framework I'm giving you, as I say, I'm not going to give you lots of cultural specifics, but the framework I'm giving you is about where to look in the negotiation to make sure that you are cognizant of and react appropriately to the cultural challenges at each stage. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Positioning or opening the negotiation. Stating your opening position clearly. We'll let the Godfather off the hook here, but there's lots of issues about how you open, what you ask for in the opening position, and how that is understood, how clear, how direct it is. So trying to get the other party to understand what you are offering or what you are asking is the process of the opening position. And what happens is that you discover that the range of opening positions can vary widely. You may be negotiating in Switzerland, and the expectation of your Swiss partner, the person you're negotiating with, may in fact be, or may an opening that is within 5% of where she or he wants to settle this negotiation. You may be negotiating somewhere in the Middle East where the opening negotiation position may sound absolutely out of sight. It may be 200% off of where you expect to settle. And what that is a marker to create the kind of conversation that will help things move along to ultimately coming to a specific decision. I'm reminded of one organization I was working with when the party that we were negotiating with was negotiating about workstations, and they said, "How much for one?" Well, how much for 150? Now we knew that they were only going to buy about 25 or 30, but 150 was an attempt to get at, how close to the bone can we get in the opening position? So you need to express as clearly as possible to the other party what your position is, and depending on the other party's culture, you may have it very easy, or you may struggle with really understanding what the opening position is. And frequently, the opening position gets shaped as it goes along rather than being explicit as the outset. So part of the process then is this positioning is clarifying what's the other person's opening position. So we're 3 stages now: plan, preliminaries, putting your position on the table, so to speak. And now we move on to the next step, which is, okay, you've made your position clear. The other party has made a position, and you need to close the gap. Now, here's the real secret to good negotiation. It's identifying the other party's underlying needs, as well as knowing your own and making them known. And then the big work of the negotiation is finding and testing alternative kinds of currencies. One of the exercises I frequently give people is I have them put like €5 each in the middle of the table, and I say you have 15 minutes to come to an agreement in which one party at least gets all of the whole €10, and you get something else that's satisfying, or vice versa. And if you don't get it in 10 minutes, it goes to my dinner, or in 15 minutes, it goes to my dinner fund. So I'm forcing the participants to discover needs that the other person may have that they can exchange things. And I've had everything from 4 jars of marmalade to somebody who made a deal for an introduction to somebody that turned out to be a $90,000 sale from the process. So it's a real negotiation. And the best one I ever had was somebody who negotiated with the other person saying, you can have all €10, but you have to tell everybody I was the toughest negotiator you ever dealt with. So the issue here is currency can be almost anything, and it may be psychological, it may be reputation. Again and again, I've seen cultures in which the person needs to come away with publicly a successful negotiation. And knowing what that has to be may make your negotiation with them a lot easier. So I've put some pictures here. You can close the gap and identifying the other party's needs. That could be all kinds of needs. I just got a couple examples here of fame and fortune and a good ice cream sundae. Okay, so then this is the main part of the negotiation, and it's here where the strategies and tactics peculiar to people's cultural background may come forward. It's here where you deal with people's hesitation to reveal their true needs. You may sense there's something there, and you have to ask lots of questions. You have to ask things about, what can I do for you so that you can give me what I want? What are you looking for that will help you feel that this has been successful, and so on and so forth. So exploring within the cultural bounds of people's needs, and realize that needs can be quite culturally determined. What you need in reputation or what you need in success may be different from what the other person needs. And it's not always just about the exchange of material goods, but it's a lot more personal stuff can be in the exchange process. And this is where really good exploration is is patient exploration is where you crack the culture code as well as the personal needs code in order to come up with enough stuff to create an agreement, which leads us to the last stage here of agreeing and implementing the decision. So in the creation of an agreement, you take what's been generated, and once again, very often I found that in some cultures, people try to close off a piece at a time, the negotiation. Okay, so we've agreed to this. Now let's deal with this. Now let's deal with this. It may be difficult to create a final agreement in that way. So in certain contexts, you may find it much more useful to get as many currencies on the table as possible and then mix and match what's needed so that both parties feel like they've got their needs met. And then you can shake hands on it or write a 300-page contract to be reviewed by the lawyers, again, depending on your culture. What is the agreement? Is the agreement something that is absolutely inflexible? I remember a number of years ago, the Japanese and the Australians had an agreement, a company agreement about the provision of sugar. And all of a sudden, there was a enormous dip in the price of sugar. And the Japanese party thought that the Australian party should adapt the contract to take advantage of this for the advantage of both parties. And the Australian position is, well, no, it's a contract. It's signed and sealed and delivered. And when this contract's over, we'll make a new one reflecting the current situation. So what is the nature of the agreement? Who needs to know about the agreement? Who is the person who finally makes the decision about the agreement? All of those are cultural questions. And then troubleshooting the implementation. How will the implementation go according to the letter of some kind of contract, or will it be something that requires continual involvement of the people who have negotiated this to make sure it works, to modify what's not working, and so on. So those are the stages and the insertion points. Now, when I do this course internationally, a part of the course is that as we do each one of these, I ask my participants to brainstorm two things. One is from their own experience, and at least what they've heard from their colleagues in various countries around the world. What are the cultural factors at each stage, and how are they acted out? And a lot of this, I have pages of stuff collected, which is culture specific, and that means things that people encountered. And then I also ask them, what are some of the tragedies, the mishaps, the cultural faux pas that you make? Okay, it's just a matter of looking at, is everything here from too much paperwork, too formal, too much losing trust because of the paperwork. There's the whole business of people invading what some people feel is their privacy and what other people think is necessary to know in certain countries, about lengthy and repeated asking of how you are and how your family is, and not doing that is something that will come back and bite you. Okay? When we talk about these stages of negotiation, we look at them and we say, well, what has to happen and what can go wrong? Okay, in each case, there are some real cultural challenges. With a startup, you may spend too much time on it or too little time, not know who the real decision maker are, who are all the stakeholders as seen in the other culture, and what needs to be resolved really from a cultural perspective. How do you determine where to open? Too much time trying to persuade or too little time to persuade? If people, according to the cultural discourse style of people at each place. So, you know, and I have comments of everything like, gee, way too much vodka to drink, to places where saying no at any point of the negotiations could make them break down. It's just a matter of looking at each one of these things. A closing, a decision may happen behind closed doors and be announced, or it may be worked out in the presence. I know that American negotiators may argue with each other while the other party is there, and that throws the other party, if that's not something that happens in their culture, into utter abandon. So, what can I say? We're running close to our end time, and I'd like to leave a little room for questions. And if it's of interest to you all, I'll make your PDF available of these slides as a reminder of where to look for the cultural issues. And I find that this breakdown into stages of negotiation itself is pretty universal and pretty identifiable. So it gives you sort of a leverage point for looking at the cultural issues. I'm going to stop because we've only got a few minutes left, so we can go over. I'm fine to hang on a bit, but questions, remarks, and so on and so forth.
Wonderful, George. Thank you very much. So, guys, we've got a moment. So, if you've got some questions or some statements, we have an expert here. So, type away. Christina from Italy has said something quite interesting. It's something you said halfway through this last section. Most managers I meet, she says, think that you should hide your position as you go through the negotiation and never be clear about this. They think that you would be weakened by being open about your position. So that seems to be a bit of a divider between the, if you like, the secret negotiators and the open negotiators. Have you got a comment on that, George?
Yeah, I think the issue here is how do you build trust? And remember, there's all kinds of negotiation. There's everything from, creating a kind of collaborative endeavor and who's going to contribute what to it, to very, very sensitive negotiations on the political level, where trust is almost zero. Okay, and so my sense of it is that it's depending on how you power in a negotiation comes from the ability of the negotiating each of the negotiating parties' ability to fulfill the other's needs.
Yeah.
The moment I'm aware of the fact that you don't have the capacity or the willingness to fulfill my needs, unless I can make some major shift here, the negotiation is over. Okay? Both parties come with needs, and if the parties don't know what their needs are about, or even if they do know or surmise them, the question is, how much power do you want to exercise here, and what is going to be the outcome of this? You know, is it a war?
Yeah.
And in which case maybe nobody really wins. So my sense of it is I try to press through each culture's ways of negotiating to create maximum trust, so that needs can be fulfilled on both sides.
No, exactly. It seems to be that there is this concept of vulnerability or trust, which is the breakthrough point. Last week I was with a railway organization, and in London we had a strike based on transport. So the most adversarial relationship in Britain is probably used to be the railways versus the unions, which is about class and privilege and money and all sorts of things. And you had to go from adversarial to mediated, and a lot of work has to be done. It still hasn't. The Mayor of London has not met the head of the unions for years. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on. Helen wants to know something very pragmatic and practical. Can you recommend a video of negotiation or a training video?
Wow.
Or do you want to rush out and make one?
Probably the problem is that most of them are culturally specific.
Yeah.
We have a list of videos that SIETAR has put together, which they're not specifically on negotiation, but it would probably be good to rethink this and create some new kinds of videos about this sort of stuff. Because my sense of it is that it's all too easy to stick with Western
Yeah.
paradigms on the negotiation process. And I'm eagerly waiting more contributions from different parts of the world. There are some videos that have gone along with this program that I teach that are part of it. But I think the more important thing is getting good case studies.
Yeah. Well, let's do that. Let's put a call out there for some good case studies and maybe film something. We'll see you all in Constance. Sounds good. Let's move on. Mexico, here we go. A good negotiation for us is based in confidence, anticipation of the other's needs, taking care and being honest with the partner. Often there is no sign in a paper or a contract, but it's about a verbal agreement. That way you deal with us counts a lot with the real business. Any comments on that? Do you have experience in Mexico?
I think it's a great comment, but when Mexico is raised, me being a gringo by origin, one of the things I'm aware of is that when Americans are negotiating with Mexicans, we need to be very, very careful to take our time because we've got a long history of being the Yankee manipulator in Latin America.
Yeah.
And so it takes quite a bit on our part as US Americans to create the kind of confidence where these values can be comfortably exercised across that cultural divide. And I say that as an example. There are other cultural divides that have historical roots and are sort of in the national or personal narrative of the negotiators. And this stuff needs to be recognized and somehow dealt with. So but I think it was a great comment on the Mexican negotiation style.
Very good. Cultural baggage. And we look at this. I mean, the Harvard method, pale and male, New England. So yeah, everything comes from its origins. Okay. A Confucian comment from Eindhoven. Commercial negotiation is selling is helping other people to buy. Do we have a...
Okay. Yeah. One of the examples I frequently use from my real life is the fact that if people can create trust, I mean, one of the best negotiating things I've ever run across is there was a big department store in the USA. It used to be called Sears. Okay.
Yep.
And if you went to buy a refrigerator at Sears, the salespeople were very, very well trained, and they would do something like selective disclosure. Like I'd say, I really like this refrigerator. I think this is the one I'm interested in. And he would walk up and he'd say, great, here's my card. Come back Monday because they're going on sale on Monday and you can save another $100. Okay.
Yeah.
So selective disclosure as a strategy creates bonding and business. So
alignment.
Yeah.
Cool. Eileen puts up the Harvard concept of the BATNA, so the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And she says, does that work in all cultures or other cultures or not in some cultures?
Well, I think the question really here is that if you are going into a negotiation, whatever your culture is, you have to think about what happens if I don't get a deal. And BATNA, for those who may not be familiar with the term, means what's your best alternative to a negotiated agreement? In other words, if you can't come away with an agreement, what are you going to do to get your needs met? That's basically what a BATNA is all about. And then, what is your fallback position to taking care of yourself or your company or your people or your deal and so on and so forth. So BATNA is a critical concept that I have not found any cultures that I've been dealing with to react negatively to that at all. They generally nod their head and say, "Yeah, we better know what's going to happen if we don't get an agreement." And besides getting our heads chopped off.
No, exactly. Some rather brutal regimes, and of course, remembering there are two. There's your BATNA, there's their BATNA. Good. We've got Astrid from Germany. I think Germany need to practice active listening. So again, we're looking at the soft skills and the interpersonal exchanges. Most people seem to be focused more on their own goals. So do you think that is the case? There are cultures where there's a sort of self-focus as opposed to an other focus?
Yeah, I see both as self-focus and I see an object focus. There are people who get into enormous amounts of persuading, and maybe the needs are not rationally met needs. On the other hand, when good listening and good active listening via questions is the way we begin to uncover needs. We ask, if you had this, what would it do for you? If I could give you this, if you could give me that, here's what it would do for me. So listening, when I teach listening, it's about not just repeating back the sense of what you heard, but trying to get at the person's inner conversation and anteing up with your own disclosure. One of the tactical things that we talk about is that, if there's high trust, you're going to be very revealing. If there's low trust, you're not going to be very revealing. So, and one of the ways to test that out is to reveal a little something. If they jump all over it and kill you with it, then shut the door. Okay, you're not going to reveal a lot more. But if, on the other hand, they come back with something, I like to think of there's also kind of an information exchange here. If you tell me this, I'll tell you that. Maybe you don't say that, but it's that kind of dynamic that builds trust as we go along.
Wonderful. So vulnerable revelation. Good. Someone's just asked a point of order. How do you spell BATNA? BATNA. So best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Nice one from Mateus. How can people build in the emotional needs? How can they be met during negotiations? I think it's almost the sub-theme of today. What can we do about people's emotional needs?
Yeah, well, first of all, what I like to do is think of the fact that expression is not necessarily a great indicator of emotion. Okay, I talk about the fact that some cultures are very, very expressive, emotional, argumentative. It's part of the game. I love living here in France because, instead of waiting silently at the cashiers at the grocery store, I can argue with the person behind me about the quality of this product or that product. In other words, we love a good argument, okay? Some people are threatened by a good argument. Some people are threatened by needing to avoid all kinds of conflict. A good example of that is I owned a house in Ohio and rented it out to a friend, and it needed some finishing on the outside, and either painted or put sheeting on or whatever. So I talked to this contract. Well, I asked my friend to get a an estimate from the contractor. And the estimate came in at something like $9,000. And I said, "Did you try to negotiate?" And my friend said, "Well, you can't do that." I said, "Yes, you can." I picked up the phone and I said, "You've offered me this $9,000. That's a little bit expensive for me. What can I do to get it for $6,500?" And the guy said, "Wait till September." Just like that, okay? In other words, his need was summertime is busy, so it's going to cost you a lot if I have to do it in the summertime. Once the season is over, I'll give you a deal. So his needs were quite different. But the point I'm trying to make here is that my friend there are people who feel like actually negotiating, confronting is difficult. I had a friend who was bargaining in the bazaar in Morocco, and he saw a lamp that he liked. He said, "How much for this?" And the guy gave him a number, and he pulled out his wallet and started to hand out the money. And the guy looked at him and he says, "I spit on your money." Which is basically going to say is, hey, if you're not going to deal with me like a good argumentative negotiating human being,
Yeah.
I'm not going to do business with you.
Yeah, you're not respecting my culture.
Yeah. So, you know, the fact that two Israelis may argue vociferously during the negotiation and go out and have a nice tea with each other afterwards may shock the more reticent of our cultures, but that's the way it is. You know.
Well,
it's not about expression. Yeah, go ahead.
There are the instant forgetters of drama, and there are those people who have a large leather tome called the Resentment Book, which will last 1,000 years. Seems to be a cultural divide.
Yeah, and watch out, that can be a gender divide too.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it can be a gender divide. And we didn't talk about the role of men and women in the negotiation process. Somebody said something about white male in Boston earlier, maybe it was you. But, you know, there's a lot to be learned about who you are in the negotiation via gender in another culture as well. I mean,
Yeah.
stuff about that.
No, a lot of things. Okay, I think we need to wrap up now. George, you are a superstar. You already know that. If you weren't so humble, you probably would have admitted it earlier. Thanks for everything. Yeah, what have we got here? So if we need to get in touch with George, here are some wonderful contact details. What's the best way? Drop you an email?
Drop me an email, or just you know, if folks want to